Clara Blackett clutched the rough wooden railing of the auction platform, her knuckles white as bone, while men's voices swelled below her like buzzards circling a carcass. It was 1878 in the unforgiving territory of Montana, and she had never imagined that, at 22 years of age, she would be sold to the highest bidder, her wedding dress still packed away in the trunk that contained all she had left in the world. $200 for the city gal. A voice called from the crowd of dusty, trail-worn men. $250. Another countered. Clara's stomach twisted as she scanned the sea of unfamiliar faces. 3 days ago, she had stepped off the stagecoach, ready to marry Harold Pemberton, the banker's son she'd corresponded with for 8 months. 2 days ago, she discovered him already married to a local woman, his letters nothing but a cruel ruse to lure an educated woman west. And yesterday, the hotel owner had seized her belongings for unpaid bills, leaving her at the mercy of this frontier town's brutal solution for women with no means or protection. $400. The voice cut through the others, deep and commanding. The auctioneer's gavel paused mid-air as the crowd parted. A tall man in a worn leather duster moved forward, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Dust caked his boots and denim pants, and a revolver hung at his hip with the casual comfort of a man who knew how to use it. Sold. The auctioneer declared, bringing down his gavel with finality. To Mr. Xavier Young. Clara felt herself sway as rough hands guided her down from the platform. Her corset felt too tight, her breath coming in short gasps as she was delivered to the tall stranger like a parcel. She lifted her chin, determined not to show fear despite the tears threatening to spill. "I'm not what you think," she said, her voice wavering only slightly. "I won't be your madam," he interrupted, his voice softer than she expected. "I don't think anything yet." He removed his hat, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, but with eyes as clear and blue as a mountain lake. He couldn't have been more than 30. "Xavier Young. I own the Double Creek Ranch about 20 miles north. You'll have a room of your own and work as my housekeeper if that suits you." "And if it doesn't," she challenged. A faint smile touched his lips. "You'll have another choice if you want, but not here, not today." He gestured toward his wagon. "This town's no place for a lady alone." Clara hesitated, weighing her non-existent options. The sun beat down mercilessly on her uncovered head, and the stares of disappointed bidders made her skin crawl. "Very well, Mr. Young," she said finally, accepting his outstretched hand. His calloused palm enveloped hers as he helped her onto the wagon seat. As they pulled away from town, Clara kept her back rigid, her gaze fixed ahead. She had come west with dreams of marriage and a new beginning. Now she belonged to a stranger, purchased like livestock at the county fair. "I won't ask what brought you to that auction block," Xavier said as they left the last buildings behind. "But I reckon it wasn't what you had in mind when you came to Montana." Clara laughed, a hollow sound. "I was to be married. Harold Pemberton promised me a home, security, and respect." The words tasted bitter. Instead, I found he already had a wife and no intention of honoring his promises. Xavier's jaw tightened. "Pemberton, the banker's boy, you know him." Know enough to steer clear. He flicked the reins, urging the horses faster. "Men like that give the rest of us a bad name." They traveled in silence for miles, the wagon rattling over uneven terrain as the town shrank behind them. Clara stole glances at her purchaser, her employer, as he claimed. His profile was strong, his expression unreadable as he guided the horses with capable hands. She'd heard stories of frontier men buying women under false pretenses. Yet something in his manner suggested he might be a man of his word. The landscape gradually changed from flat, dusty plains to rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows across the trail. "Why?" Clara finally asked, breaking the silence. "Why would you pay $400 for a housekeeper?" Xavier's eyes remained on the trail. "Needed one, and $400 seemed a fair price to save a lady from whatever those men had in mind." That's a considerable sum for simple decency. Maybe. He slowed the horses as they approached a creek. But I reckon some things are worth paying for. The Double Creek Ranch came into view as they crested a hill, a sprawling log house nestled in a valley between twin streams, with several outbuildings, corrals, and pastures where cattle grazed. It wasn't grand like the eastern mansions Clara had seen, but it was substantial, well-built, and spoke of hard-earned prosperity. "It's larger than I expected," she admitted. "Built it to grow into," Xavier replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "Started with just the center part 10 years ago. Added on as the herd grew." As they drew nearer, a dog came bounding toward them, followed by an older man who emerged from what appeared to be a bunkhouse. "That's Caleb," Xavier explained. "Foreman, been with me since I claimed this land. There's 3 other hands who work the cattle, but they are out with the herd." Clara nodded, anxiety building in her chest. What would these men think of her, brought here like purchased goods? Would they respect the boundaries Xavier had promised? Xavier drew the wagon to a halt before the main house. "Caleb, this is Miss Blackett. She'll be keeping house for us." The foreman touched the brim of his hat. "Madam, welcome to Double Creek." His greeting was respectful, his eyes kind beneath bushy gray brows. Clara felt some of her tension ease. "Thank you," she replied with as much dignity as she could muster. Xavier jumped down from the wagon, then reached up to help her. His hands at her waist were strong but careful as he lifted her to the ground. For a moment they stood close enough that Clara could smell leather and pine on his clothes. He stepped back quickly. "I'll show you to your room. You must be tired." The house was surprisingly orderly inside, though clearly wanting a woman's touch. Simple, sturdy furniture filled the main room with a large fireplace at one end. Xavier led her up a short staircase to a bedroom at the back of the house. "This will be yours," he said, pushing open the door. The room was small but pleasant, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window overlooking the creek. Clean linens were folded at the foot of the bed. "It's comfortable," Clara said, genuinely surprised. "Thank you." Xavier shifted his weight. "Kitchen's well stocked. We've been making do with our own cooking, so anything you prepare will be an improvement. Washrooms off the kitchen. There's hot water if you want to clean up." He hesitated. "I'll have Caleb bring your trunk when it arrives." Clara's face fell. "There is no trunk coming. Everything I owned was seized for debts at the hotel." Xavier frowned. "You have nothing, only what I'm wearing." She gestured to her travel-worn dress, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "I'll send for some things from the Mercantile in Benton," he said after a moment. "Write down what you need, sizes too." "Mr. Young, I can't possibly repay, it's part of your employment," he cut in firmly. "Can't have my housekeeper without proper clothes." After he left, Clara sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. Through the open window came the sounds of cattle lowing in the distance, the rustle of aspen leaves, and men's voices as they went about their work. It was peaceful compared to the chaos of town, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she had merely exchanged one form of captivity for another. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the small locket hidden beneath her dress, the last gift from her mother before consumption had claimed her 2 years ago. Inside was a tiny portrait of her parents and a lock of her mother's hair. It was all she had left of her former life. "I will survive this," she whispered to herself. "I will find a way to be free again." In the gathering dusk, she washed her face and hands in the basin provided, combed her hair as best she could without a proper brush, and ventured downstairs. In the kitchen, she found provisions that would make a simple meal. By the time Xavier and Caleb came in from the evening chores, she had soup and cornbread waiting. Their appreciation was evident as they ate, and Clara felt a small sense of accomplishment. This, at least, was something she could control. "Where did you learn to cook, Miss Blackett?" Caleb asked between spoonfuls. "I kept house for my father after my mother passed," she explained, "and I taught at a small school in Ohio." Xavier looked up. "You're a teacher?" "I was." She ladled more soup into his bowl. "But teaching positions for women in the West are scarce, I've found." We've no proper school within 30 miles, Caleb commented. Shame, with so many families settling now. Xavier was watching her with new interest. You came west to marry and teach. I came west because I had nowhere else to go, Clara admitted. My father remarried and his new wife made it clear there was no place for me in their home. Harold's letters painted a picture of opportunity here. She gave a bitter smile. Clearly, I was mistaken. An uncomfortable silence fell. Clara busied herself clearing dishes, aware of the men exchanging glances. Miss Blackett, Xavier finally said, I meant what I said in town. You're not obligated to stay here. Once you've had time to rest and consider your options, I'll help you find a proper situation. Clara turned to face him. Why would you do that? You paid good money for me. His expression hardened. I paid to get you off that auction block, not to own you. No person should own another. Something flashed in his eyes, an old pain, quickly masked. The money means nothing. Your choice means everything. In that moment, Clara glimpsed something unexpected in this rugged rancher, a depth of principle she hadn't anticipated. She nodded slowly. Thank you, Mr. Young. I'll consider my options carefully. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Clara listened to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, answered by another. The wind whispered secrets to the trees, and the creek gurgled its endless song. Despite her uncertain future, she felt safer than she had since arriving in Montana territory. Morning came with pale light filtering through the curtainless window. For a moment, Clara was disoriented before the events of the previous day flooded back. She dressed quickly in her rumpled clothes and made her way downstairs. To her surprise, the kitchen was already active. Xavier stood at the stove, frying bacon while coffee percolated in a battered pot. Good morning, he said, glancing up. Didn't expect you to start work at dawn. Thought you might want to rest. I've never been one to lie abed, she replied, moving toward the stove. Please let me take over, he stepped aside, handling her the spatula. I've made breakfast for myself for 10 years. Won't claim it's good, but it's edible. I'm sure you've managed admirably. Clara took control of the bacon, adding eggs to another pan. But since I'm here, I might as well make myself useful. By the time Caleb and the other hands Tom, Marcus, and a young man called Ricky who couldn't be more than 18 arrived for breakfast, Clara had a substantial meal prepared. The men were respectful if curious, casting sideways glances at her as they ate. Miss Blackett came west to teach, Xavier announced, surprising her. Seems a waste to have her just keeping house when there are children around here with no schooling. The men nodded in agreement. Johnson's got 4 little ones, Tom said, and the Millers just west have 3 more. Henderson's too. Might be a dozen school-age children within riding distance, Caleb added. Clara looked at Xavier in confusion. What are you suggesting? He met her gaze steadily. That maybe there's more than one way to be useful. You could teach during the day, keep house in your spare time. We could fix up the old cabin by the North Creek as a schoolhouse. He shrugged as if it were a simple matter. Just a thought. Clara felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. Teaching again, doing what she loved, what she was trained for. It seemed too good to be true. The families would pay, Xavier continued. Not much, but enough to give you some independence. The word hung in the air between them, a promise and a challenge. I would need books, supplies, she said cautiously. We can send to Helena for those. Next supply run. The men were watching her expectantly, as if they'd already decided this was a fine plan. I'll need to meet these families first, she said. See if they're amenable, Xavier nodded. Sunday's church meeting at the Hendersons' place. Most everyone attends. We could ride over. Clara raised an eyebrow. Can't have you riding alone until you know the territory, he replied. Too easy to get lost or run into trouble. She wanted to argue but knew he was right. The vast landscape beyond the ranch was foreign to her, filled with unknown dangers. Very well, she conceded. Sunday then. After breakfast, Clara set about exploring her new domain. The house was substantial, 3 bedrooms upstairs, a large main room below with dining area and sitting space before the stone fireplace, a functional kitchen with a proper stove, and a small washroom with a copper tub. Everything was clean but basic, clearly maintained by men with little concern for comfort or beauty. She found a broom and began sweeping, the familiar task soothing her nerves. Through the windows, she could see the men at work: Xavier and Tom mending a corral fence, Caleb and Marcus working with horses in the training pen, young Ricky carrying water to the garden plot behind the house. By midday, she had swept, dusted, and organized the kitchen to her satisfaction. She prepared a simple lunch of beans, leftover cornbread, and coffee, ringing the brass bell outside the kitchen door to summon the men. They came quickly, washing up at the pump before filing into the house. Clara observed them as they ate, these strangers among whom fate had placed her. They were a diverse group: Caleb with his weathered face and quiet dignity, Tom, burly and bearded but with gentle hands, Marcus, dark-skinned and reserved, speaking with an accent she couldn't place, and Ricky, all gangly limbs and eager smiles. And then there was Xavier. Unlike the others, he was harder to read. He spoke little but observed much, his gaze thoughtful as it occasionally rested on her. He treated his men with respect, listened to their concerns, and appeared to value their opinions. Not once did she see him pull rank or assert his authority unnecessarily. As the men prepared to return to work, a rider approached from the east road. Xavier tensed almost imperceptibly, then relaxed as he recognized the visitor. "Sheriff," he said as the man dismounted. "What brings you out this way?" Sheriff Davis, a broad-shouldered man with a silver-streaked mustache, removed his hat as he entered the yard. "Tracking rustlers, lost their trail about 5 miles east." His eyes fell on Clara standing in the doorway. "Madam," Xavier made the introductions. "Miss Blackett's our new housekeeper, also planning to start a school for the local children." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "That's so, good news for the territory, but—" He glanced between them. "Wasn't there some commotion in Benton yesterday, something about an auction?" Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Miss Blackett had a run of bad luck," Xavier said smoothly. "I offered her employment, all proper and above board." The sheriff studied them both for a long moment. "Well then, glad to hear it." He turned back to Xavier. "You seen any strangers around?" "Missing cattle? Not lately, but we'll keep watch." After the sheriff departed, Clara confronted Xavier in the kitchen. "He knows what happened in town. He thinks I'm—" "It doesn't matter what he thinks," Xavier interrupted. "You're working here legitimately. What happened in Benton stays in Benton. But my reputation will be what you make it from here on out." His voice was firm but not unkind. "People out here judge by actions more than rumors. Teach their children well, and they won't care how you came to be here." Clara wanted to believe him, but she'd seen how quickly gossip could destroy a woman's standing. Still, what choice did she have? This opportunity, unexpected as it was, might be her only path to rebuilding her life. "I'll need proper clothes if I'm to be presentable on Sunday," she said finally. Xavier nodded. "I'll send Ricky to Benton tomorrow with a list. The mercantile owner's wife is about your size. She can help select appropriate items." The next few days fell into a rhythm. Clara rose early, prepared meals, cleaned, mended clothes the men brought to her, and explored the immediate surroundings of the ranch. Each day she ventured a little farther, gaining confidence in navigating the property. Xavier was often absent, working with the cattle or riding the boundaries of his land, but when present, he treated her with unfailing courtesy. Sometimes she would catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher, not desire or assessment, but something more complex, as if she were a puzzle he was trying to solve. On Friday, Ricky returned from town with parcels: 3 serviceable dresses, undergarments, a nightgown, toiletries, and even a brush and hand mirror. Clara nearly wept at the sight of these basic necessities she had taken for granted before. "Mrs. Thornton at the mercantile sent this too," Ricky said, handing her a smaller package. Inside, Clara found a length of blue ribbon, a small pot of lavender-scented cream and a note. "Every lady needs a few pretty things. Welcome to Montana." The simple kindness from a stranger touched her deeply. That night, she washed her hair in the copper tub, brushed it until it shone, and slept in clean nightclothes for the first time in over a week. Sunday dawned clear and mild. Clara dressed in her best new dress, a deep blue calico with a white collar, and pinned her hair neatly, using the ribbon as a finishing touch. When she descended the stairs, Xavier was waiting in the main room, wearing a clean shirt and his best denim pants, his hair slicked back with water. He stared at her for a moment before speaking. "You look very nice, Miss Blackett." "Thank you," she replied, surprised by his momentary loss of composure. "The clothes fit well. Please extend my thanks to Mrs. Thornton when you next see her." They rode to the Henderson farm in the wagon, the journey taking nearly an hour over rolling hills and across a wide valley. Clara used the time to ask Xavier about the families she would meet. "The Hendersons have been here almost as long as I have," he explained. "Good people. 2 boys, 11 and 9. The Johnsons arrived 3 years ago, 4 children between 6 and 12. The Millers have 3 girls, all school age. There are others scattered around with younger children who will be ready for schooling soon. And they all attend these Sunday gatherings. When weather permits. No proper church yet, so we rotate between farms. Preacher comes through once a month, but folks meet weekly regardless. Sing hymns, read scripture, share a meal. It's as much social as spiritual." The Henderson farm came into view, a sturdy log house, a large barn, and several outbuildings, surrounded by fields of ripening wheat. Several wagons and horses were already there. Families gathered in the yard or inside the barn, which had been set up for the meeting. Clara felt a flutter of nerves as Xavier helped her down from the wagon. All eyes turned toward them as they approached, curious, assessing, some openly surprised. A tall woman with graying blonde hair stepped forward. "Xavier Young, you've been holding out on us." She extended her hand to Clara. "Martha Henderson, welcome to our home, Miss." "Clara Blackett," she replied, taking the offered hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Martha's grip was firm, her smile genuine. "The pleasure is ours. Come, meet everyone before the service starts." What followed was a whirlwind of introductions. Clara met the Johnson family, stern-faced William, his cheerful wife Sarah, and their 4 curious children. The Miller sisters with their 3 rambunctious girls, elderly Mr. and Mrs. Cooper, the Dawson family with twins, and several bachelor farmers and ranchers who lived alone on scattered homesteads. Throughout the introductions, Xavier remained at her side, his presence reassuring amid the scrutiny. When asked how she came to be at Double Creek, he smoothly explained that she had come west to teach but found herself in need of accommodation, which he had provided in exchange for housekeeping until more permanent arrangements could be made. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Clara was grateful for his discretion. The service was simple hymns sung with more enthusiasm than skill, passages read from a well-worn Bible, prayers offered for rain, good harvests, and healing for Mrs. Cooper's rheumatism. Clara found herself drawn into the familiar rituals, comforted by the continuity of faith in this wild place. Afterward, during the communal meal spread on long tables in the yard, Xavier broached the subject of the school. "Miss Blackett is a trained teacher," he explained to the assembled parents. "She's willing to establish a school for your children if there's interest." The response was immediate and positive. Parents crowded around, asking questions about her experience, what subjects she would teach, and when classes might begin. The old line cabin at Double Creek could be converted to a schoolhouse, Xavier continued. "It's centrally located for most families. With some work, it could be ready by harvest end." "We can help with that," William Johnson offered. "All of us men could pitch in." "And we'll provide supplies," Sarah added. "Books, slates, whatever's needed." Clara was overwhelmed by their eagerness. "I would need to assess the children's current levels of education," she said. "Some may be more advanced than others." They're all pretty much untaught except what we've managed ourselves, Martha Henderson admitted. The boys can cipher a bit and read simple passages but proper schooling. She shook her head. It's what we came west hoping to build eventually. By the end of the gathering, it was settled. The men would meet the following Saturday to begin work on the schoolhouse. The women would organize supplies. Classes would begin after harvest, giving everyone time to prepare. As they drove back to Double Creek in the late afternoon sun, Clara felt a curious mixture of excitement and trepidation. They accepted me so readily, she marveled. Xavier glanced at her. They've been wanting a teacher for years. You're the answer to their prayers. What if I disappoint them? You won't. His confidence was absolute. I've seen you these past days, how you organize, how you think, how you speak. You'll be exactly what those children need. His faith in her abilities touched something deep inside Clara. For the first time since arriving in Montana, she felt a sense of purpose returning. Thank you, she said softly, for everything you've done. Xavier's hands tightened on the reins. I haven't done much, just what any decent man would do. We both know that's not true. Most men would have. She couldn't finish the sentence. I'm not most men. There was an edge to his voice that made her glance at him sharply. No, she agreed after a moment. You're not. The weeks that followed were filled with activity. True to their word, the neighboring men arrived the next Saturday to begin work on the schoolhouse. The old line cabin originally built when Xavier first claimed the land was solid but basic. Under his direction, they added windows for light, a proper floor to replace the packed earth, a stove for heat, and benches and tables for the students. Clara threw herself into preparations for teaching. She inventoried the books families contributed, organized them by subject and difficulty, and created a curriculum that would accommodate different ages and abilities. In her free time, she continued keeping house, finding satisfaction in bringing order and comfort to the ranch. The men grew accustomed to her presence. Young Ricky developed an obvious case of hero worship, following her about whenever chores allowed, eager to help carry water or bring in firewood. Caleb treated her with grandfatherly affection, often sharing stories of the early days in the territory. Tom and Marcus were more reserved but unfailingly polite, and Xavier remained something of an enigma. Their interactions were cordial, occasionally warm, but he maintained a careful distance. Sometimes she would enter a room and find him watching her with that same unreadable expression, only to look away when their eyes met. One evening in late August, as Clara sat on the porch mending one of Xavier's shirts, he joined her, settling into the chair beside hers with a sigh of fatigue. Hard day, she asked, not looking up from her needle. Long one. He stretched his legs before him, rode the north boundary, saw signs of that rustling the sheriff mentioned. Clara glanced up in concern. Nearby, close enough to worry. His profile was stern in the fading light. I'll have the men take turns keeping watch at night. They sat in companionable silence as twilight deepened. Crickets began their evening chorus, and somewhere in the distance an owl called. It's peaceful here, Clara said softly. Despite the hard work and isolation, Xavier nodded. That's why I chose it. Wanted land far enough from town to be left alone, but good enough to make the work worthwhile. You've built something remarkable, she observed. Most men couldn't have done this alone. Wasn't entirely alone. Caleb's been with me from the start. Clara sensed there was more to the story. How did you come to be here? To Montana territory? Xavier was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low, almost distant. I was born in Virginia. My father owned a large tobacco plantation, and people. The last word fell between them like a stone. After the war, everything changed. My father couldn't accept it. He died rather than adapt to the new order. I'm sorry, Clara said, though she suspected the story was more complicated. I wasn't. His honesty was stark. He was a cruel man. To his slaves, to my mother, even to me. When he died, I sold what was left of the land and headed west, wanted nothing to do with the kind of power he wielded. He turned to look at her directly. That's why I couldn't leave you on that auction block, Miss Blackett. I've seen what happens when people are treated as property. The confession explained much about him: his insistence on her freedom to choose, his refusal to leverage the power he held over her, his quiet dignity that demanded the same from others. "Thank you for telling me," she said, deeply moved by his trust. He nodded once, then rose. "Getting late. I should check on the horses before turning in." As he walked away, Clara realized something had shifted between them. He had shared part of himself, a vulnerable truth from his past. It wasn't exactly friendship, but it was more than the cautious courtesy that had characterized their relationship until now. The harvest season brought new rhythms to the ranch. The men were often in the fields from dawn till dusk, and Clara found herself cooking enormous meals to sustain them through the long days of physical labor. She learned to make bread in the quantities needed to feed hungry men, to preserve the vegetables from the kitchen garden, and to manage the household with increasing confidence. The schoolhouse was completed in mid-September, a simple but functional building with 6 windows, a sturdy door, and a stove that would keep it warm through the coming winter. Inside, 3 long tables with benches would accommodate the 12 children expected to attend. The night before school was to begin, Clara couldn't sleep. She paced her small room, reviewing her plans, worrying over details, questioning her ability to succeed. Finally, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and went downstairs, intending to make tea to calm her nerves. To her surprise, Xavier was in the kitchen, a cup of coffee before him, account books spread across the table. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, looking up as she entered. "Too many thoughts," she admitted. "I'm worried about tomorrow. First day nerves." He closed the ledger and pushed it aside. "Sit, I'll make you some tea." Clara watched in amazement as he competently prepared a cup of chamomile tea, setting it before her with a small pot of honey. "You know how to make tea?" He gave a half smile. "Contrary to appearances, I wasn't raised in a barn. My mother insisted on certain civilized habits." Clara added honey to her tea, warming her hands around the cup. "Tell me about her." She was gentle, too gentle for the life my father forced on her. His voice softened with memory. "She taught me to read, to value learning. She played piano beautifully. You miss her." "Every day. She died when I was 16. He paused. "What about your parents?" Clara sipped her tea, gathering her thoughts. "My father was a minister in Ohio, very strict, very proper. My mother balanced him. She had warmth and humor that he lacked. When she died, something in him hardened. He remarried within a year to a woman from his congregation. She made it clear there was no place for a grown daughter in their home. So you agreed to marry a man you'd never met." Harold's letters were charming, intelligent. He described his life here, his hopes for the future, his desire for an educated wife to help build something meaningful. She shook her head at her own naivety. "I believed every word." Xavier's expression darkened. "Men like Pemberton give honest men a bad name." "Not all men are like you, Mr. Young." "Xavier," he said suddenly, "after all this time you might as well use my given name." The invitation to such familiarity surprised her. "Then you must call me Clara," he nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Clara, it suits you." Something warm unfurled in her chest at the way he said her name. They talked for another hour, sharing stories from their pasts, discussing books they had read, discovering unexpected common ground. When Clara finally returned to her room, her anxiety about the coming day had been replaced by a different kind of restlessness, one centered on the man, whose quiet strength and unexpected depths were beginning to fascinate her. The first day of school went better than Clara could have hoped. The children, though varied in ages and abilities, were eager to learn. They arrived on horseback or in wagons driven by parents who stayed to observe the morning lessons before departing with promises to return at day's end. Clara established routines, assessed each child's knowledge, and organized them into groups based on ability rather than age. By the end of the day, she had 12 tired but excited pupils and a clear plan for the weeks ahead. Xavier met her at the schoolhouse door as the last child departed, his expression unreadable as always, but his eyes holding something that might have been pride. "How was it?" he asked, falling into step beside her as they walked back to the main house. "Wonderful," she admitted, unable to contain her smile. "They're bright, eager, even the older boys who pretended disinterest at first. By afternoon they were competing to answer questions about arithmetic. I knew you'd be good at this." His simple confidence warmed her more than effusive praise would have. They walked in comfortable silence, the late September sun casting long shadows across the yard. "I've been thinking," Xavier said as they approached the house. "You should be paid properly for teaching, not just for housekeeping." "The families are contributing what they can," Clara reminded him. "It's not enough, not for someone with your education and skills." He held the door for her. "I'm adding $20 a month to your wages." "That's far too generous, it's fair," he interrupted. "And I can afford it. The ranch is doing well." Clara studied his face, trying to understand his motivation. There was no hint of ulterior motive, just the same straightforward honesty she'd come to expect from him. "Thank you," she said finally. "I'll accept on one condition." He raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "That you let me teach you and the other men in the evenings. I've noticed Ricky struggles with his letters and Marcus mentioned wanting to improve his English." Xavier considered this. "The men would appreciate it. As for me," he smiled, a rare full smile that transformed his serious face. "I'd be honored to be your student, Clara." The evening lessons soon became a highlight of ranch life. 3 times a week after dinner, whoever wasn't on night watch would gather in the main room. Clara taught reading, writing, and arithmetic, adapting her approach to each man's needs. Ricky made rapid progress with his letters. Marcus, whose first language was Spanish, improved his English pronunciation. Tom, who had never learned to write properly, took special pride in signing his name without an X. Even Caleb joined in, confessing a lifelong desire to read Shakespeare, which Clara was delighted to help fulfill. Xavier, though well-educated by frontier standards, discovered new pleasures in literature as Clara introduced him to poets and novelists he'd never encountered. Sometimes they would discuss a passage long after the others had retired, debating interpretations or sharing their responses to particularly moving sections. As autumn deepened, bringing colder nights and frost-tinged mornings, Clara found herself looking forward to these quiet conversations more than any other part of her day. Xavier's mind was sharp, his observations insightful, and his dry humor increasingly evident as he relaxed in her company. One October evening, as they sat before the fire discussing a poem by Tennyson, Clara realized with sudden clarity that her feelings for Xavier had grown far beyond gratitude or friendship. The realization must have shown on her face, for he paused mid-sentence. "What is it?" he asked, brow furrowing in concern. "Nothing," she said quickly. "Just tired, I suppose." He didn't appear convinced but didn't press. "It's late, we should both get some rest." As they rose to retire, their hands brushed accidentally. The brief contact sent a jolt through Clara that she struggled to conceal. Xavier's eyes met hers for a moment, and she thought she saw a flash of something answer in his gaze before he stepped back. "Good night, Clara," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Good night," she replied, hurrying toward the stairs, confused by her own reaction and afraid he might have noticed. In the privacy of her room, Clara pressed her hands to her heated cheeks. This was dangerous territory. Xavier was her employer, her rescuer, her friend perhaps, but anything more would complicate a situation already fraught with potential impropriety. The townspeople had only just begun to accept her as the schoolteacher. Rumors of romantic entanglement with the man who had purchased her would revive all the worst assumptions. And yet, she couldn't deny the growing attraction, the deep respect, and the genuine affection she felt for him. In the weeks since her arrival, she had seen Xavier's character revealed in 1,000 small ways: his fairness with his men, his gentleness with animals, his respect for her independence, his hunger for knowledge, his quiet generosity toward neighbors in need. "Foolish heart," she whispered to herself, "he has given you no reason to hope." But even as she tried to dismiss the possibility, Clara remembered moments that suggested otherwise. The way his eyes followed her across a room, his attentiveness to her comfort, the slight smile that appeared only in her presence, the careful distance he maintained as if afraid of stepping too close. Sleep came fitfully that night, filled with dreams of what might be and fears of what could never be. The first snow fell in early November, dusting the ranch with white that melted by midday. Clara continued teaching, watching with satisfaction as her pupils progressed. The evening classes with the ranch hands became more sporadic as winter preparations demanded longer working hours. But Xavier still found time to discuss books with her, often bringing coffee to the main room where she graded student work. One such evening, as sleet tapped against the windows and the fire crackled in the hearth, Xavier broached a subject they had both avoided. "Sheriff Davis mentioned something interesting when he stopped by yesterday," he said, watching her over the rim of his coffee cup. Clara set down her pen. "Oh, seems Harold Pemberton and his wife have left the territory rather suddenly. Creditors after them." Clara absorbed this information. "I see. Does it matter to you that he's gone?" She considered the question carefully. "A month ago I might have felt vindicated, now." She shook her head. "He seems irrelevant, a mistake in my past, nothing more." Xavier nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've made a place for yourself here, the families respect you, the children adore you." "And you?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. His eyes met hers, something vulnerable flickering in their depths. The door burst open, cutting him off as Marcus rushed in, snow dusting his shoulders. "Boss, riders coming in fast from the north, 6, maybe 7. Xavier was on his feet instantly, striding to the gun cabinet. "Get Caleb and Tom, Ricky too if he's back from checking the south pasture." Clara stood, alarm rising in her chest. Who would be riding in this weather at this hour? No one with good intentions. Xavier checked his revolver, then handed a rifle to Marcus. "Clara, go upstairs. Stay away from the windows. I can help, please." His voice was urgent now. "I need to know you're safe." Something in his tone silenced her arguments. She nodded and headed for the stairs, pausing at the bottom to look back at him. Their eyes held for a moment before he turned away, giving instructions to Marcus as more men entered from the bunkhouse. From her window, despite Xavier's warning, Clara could see riders approaching, dark shapes against the snow-covered ground. They slowed as they reached the yard, spreading out to surround the house and outbuildings. In the moonlight, she could make out weapons in their hands, voices carried on the cold air. Xavier's, calm but firm, and another, louder and slurred with liquor. The second voice sounded vaguely familiar, though Clara couldn't place it. "Know you've got cattle that don't belong to you, Young," the stranger called. "Sheriff's been looking in all the wrong places." "My herd's clean, Madden," Xavier replied. "You're trespassing on private property. Turn around and ride out while you still can. Not without what's owed. Your fancy Eastern lady in there too. Heard you bought yourself a bride in Benton." Clara's blood ran cold as she realized who was outside. Jeremiah Madden, one of the disappointed bidders from the auction in Benton. He had been visibly angry when Xavier outbid him, muttering threats as they departed. The confrontation in the yard escalated. Madden and his men demanded to search the ranch buildings. Xavier refused. Threats were exchanged. Clara held her breath, knowing how quickly such standoffs could turn deadly. The first shot came without warning, a flash in the darkness followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. Then chaos erupted. Men shouted, horses screamed, more shots rang out. Clara pressed herself against the wall beside the window. Heart pounding through gaps in the curtain, she could see Xavier and his men taking cover, returning fire with careful precision while Madden's group shot wildly. One of the attackers fell from his horse. Another cried out in pain. The remaining riders began to retreat, firing as they went. Then Clara saw Xavier stagger, clutching his side. He maintained his position, firing again, but she could tell he was injured. Fear gripped her as she watched him force himself to stand straight, refusing to show weakness until the last of the attackers had disappeared into the darkness. Only when they were gone did he sink to one knee. Caleb and Tom rushed to his side while Marcus and Ricky kept watch in case the riders returned. Clara flew down the stairs and out the door, heedless of danger, the cold night air shocking against her skin as she ran to where Xavier knelt in the snow. How bad? She demanded, dropping to her knees beside him. Just grazed, he grunted, though the blood seeping between his fingers suggested otherwise. Madden's a poor shot, even at close range. Get him inside, Clara ordered, suddenly taking charge. Caleb, bring my sewing kit and the whiskey. Tom, I need hot water and clean cloths. They obeyed without question, supporting Xavier between them as they moved toward the house. Once inside, they helped him to the sofa near the fire. Clara cut away his blood-soaked shirt, revealing a deep furrow across his ribs where the bullet had torn through flesh without penetrating his chest. Lucky, she murmured, examining the wound. Half an inch deeper and we'd be having a different conversation. Xavier's eyes, tight with pain, still managed a glint of humor. Didn't know school teachers doubled as doctors. My father believed in practical education, she replied, cleaning the wound with whiskey-soaked cloth. Hold still. This needs stitching. He grimaced, but made no sound as she sewed the wound closed with neat, careful stitches. The men watched in respectful silence as she worked, their faces reflecting new appreciation for their schoolteacher's hidden skills. When she finished, Clara bound his torso with clean bandages, her hands steady despite the fear still coursing through her. Only when the task was complete did she allow herself to acknowledge how close she had come to losing him. You should rest, she said, her voice betraying more emotion than she intended. The wound isn't dangerous if infection doesn't set in, but you've lost blood. Xavier caught her hand as she turned away. Thank you, he said quietly, for her ears alone, for everything. Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She busied herself cleaning up the medical supplies while Caleb and Tom helped Xavier to his room, then set the other men to keeping watch in shifts through the night. Later, unable to sleep, she checked on Xavier. He was awake, propped against pillows, his face pale in the lamplight. You should be resting, she chided gently from the doorway, so should you. He gestured for her to enter, but I suspect we're both too alert after all that excitement. Clara approached the bed, automatically checking his bandages. No fresh bleeding, that's good. Madden won't be back, Xavier said, correctly interpreting her worried expression. He lost 2 men tonight and accomplished nothing, even he's not fool enough to try again. What did he want? Really? Xavier sighed. He's been rustling cattle across 3 counties. Sheriff's been looking for the thieves for months. Madden came here hoping to plant evidence, make it look like I was involved. Why you? We have history. Before I established this ranch, I worked as a marshal's deputy. Arrested Madden twice for assault and theft. He served time because of my testimony. His mouth twisted. He's nursed that grudge for 8 years. Clara sat on the edge of the bed. And now he's added me to his list of grievances against you. I'm sorry you were dragged into this. Xavier reached for her hand. When I heard him mention you, I've never wanted to kill a man before tonight. The raw honesty in his voice sent a shiver through her. Violence isn't your nature, Xavier. It's why you left Virginia, why you've built this place as you have. Some things are worth protecting at any cost. His fingers tightened around hers. Some people. In the quiet that followed, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings too dangerous to name. Clara gently withdrew her hand. You need to rest, she said, rising. I'll check on you in the morning. At the door, she paused, looking back. I'm glad you weren't killed tonight. A smile touched his lips. That makes 2 of us. The next morning brought Sheriff Davis and 2 deputies, following the trail of Madden's retreating gang. They took statements, examined evidence of the firefight and promised to bring the attackers to justice. "You'll testify against Madden when we catch him?" the sheriff asked Xavier, who sat at the kitchen table, moving stiffly but insisting he was well enough to handle ranch business. "I will," Xavier confirmed. "So will my men." The sheriff turned to Clara. "Madam, I understand you provided medical assistance. Did you see or hear anything that might help identify the attackers?" Clara described what she had witnessed, including Madden's reference to the auction in Benton. The sheriff's expression revealed nothing, but she sensed his assessment of her situation at Double Creek shifting. After the lawman departed, Clara found herself unexpectedly alone with Xavier. The men had been sent to check for any damage to the outlying buildings and to ensure no cattle had been stolen during the night's commotion. "The sheriff knows everything now," she said, pouring coffee for them both. "About how I came to be here." Xavier accepted the cup she offered. "Does that trouble you?" "Oddly, no." She sat across from him. "Perhaps because there's nothing improper in our arrangement now. I'm a schoolteacher who happens to keep house in exchange for room and board. Many would consider it a perfectly respectable situation." "Is that all it is to you?" Xavier asked quietly. "A respectable arrangement." Clara's heart quickened at his tone. "What else could it be?" He set down his cup, his eyes holding hers with sudden intensity. "I think you know, Clara." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Clara found herself unable to look away, unable to deny what had been building between them for weeks. "It would complicate matters," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Life is complicated," he replied. "Pretending otherwise doesn't make it simpler." Before she could respond, the door opened and Caleb entered, breaking the tension. The moment passed, but something had changed. The unspoken had been acknowledged, however obliquely. In the days that followed, Xavier recovered quickly from his wound. Clara found reasons to check on him frequently, bringing food, fresh bandages, or simply stopping by his office to ask questions about ranch operations. Each interaction seemed charged with new awareness, though neither of them directly addressed the conversation in the kitchen. Winter settled over the territory, bringing short days and long, cold nights. School continued when weather permitted, with parents taking turns transporting children through snow-covered trails. Clara's evenings were filled with lesson planning, maintaining the household, and increasingly, conversations with Xavier that stretched late into the night. They spoke of books, of their pasts, of their hopes for the future. Xavier described his dreams for the ranch, expanding the herd, improving the bloodlines, perhaps building a larger house someday. Clara shared her desire to establish a permanent school, to continue teaching as long as she was needed. Neither mentioned what would happen when spring came, when Clara would have earned enough to consider moving on if she chose. The question hung between them, unasked and unanswered. Christmas approached, bringing preparations for celebration despite the isolation of frontier life. Clara decorated the main room with pine boughs and red ribbon purchased from the mercantile in Benton. The women from neighboring homesteads exchanged recipes and handcrafted gifts. The children at school prepared a Christmas pageant to perform for their parents. A week before Christmas, Xavier rode into Benton for supplies, returning late in the day with the wagon loaded. Among the provisions were several mysterious packages that he refused to let Clara examine. "Christmas surprises," he explained with a secretive smile. "No peeking." On Christmas Eve, the ranch hands gathered in the main house for a special dinner. Clara had prepared roast venison, potatoes, preserved vegetables from the fall harvest, and apple pies made with the last of the stored fruit. Afterward, they exchanged simple gifts, knitted scarves and mittens Clara had made for each man, hand-carved wooden figures they had crafted for her in return. When the men retired to the bunkhouse, Xavier brought out a small box wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "Merry Christmas, Clara," he said, placing it in her hands. Inside, nestled in a bed of cotton, lay a delicate silver pendant on a fine chain. The pendant was shaped like a book, with tiny hinges that allowed it to open, revealing space for miniature portraits or locks of hair. "Xavier," she breathed, lifting it carefully. "It's beautiful." "I thought you might keep your parents' images inside," he explained. "You mentioned your locket was getting tarnished beyond repair." The thoughtfulness of the gift nearly brought tears to her eyes. "How did you know?" "I pay attention," he said simply. "May I?" She nodded, turning so he could fasten the chain around her neck. His fingers were gentle as they brushed against her skin, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "I have something for you as well," Clara said when he stepped back. She retrieved a package from beneath the sofa cushion where she had hidden it, though it seems inadequate now. Xavier unwrapped the gift carefully, a leather-bound journal embossed with his initials, accompanied by a silver fountain pen. "For your thoughts," she explained. "You mentioned once that you wished you had recorded the early days of building the ranch. It's not too late to begin." He ran his fingers over the soft leather, genuinely moved. "This is perfect, Clara, thank you." Their eyes met across the small space between them, the firelight casting a warm glow over his features. Clara felt herself drawn toward him, her resistance weakening. "Xavier," she began, uncertain what she meant to say. A loud knock at the door startled them both. Xavier's hand moved automatically to his holster as he went to answer. Sheriff Davis stood on the porch, snow dusting his coat and hat. "Young, Miss Blackett, sorry to disturb your Christmas Eve." "Come in, Sheriff," Xavier invited, concern evident in his voice. "What brings you out in this weather?" The lawman stomped snow from his boots as he entered. "Caught Madden and what's left of his gang. They're in jail in Helena awaiting trial." He glanced between them. "Thought you'd want to know, considering the trouble they caused here." "That is good news," Xavier agreed. "Will you stay for coffee? Maybe something stronger to ward off the cold." The sheriff accepted a small glass of whiskey, warming his hands by the fire as he shared the details of Madden's capture. "He had plenty to say about both of you," he added, his eyes resting briefly on Clara. "Particularly about certain events in Benton." Clara stiffened, but Xavier's voice remained calm. "Madden's a known liar and criminal. I hope his tales carry little weight with you, Sheriff." Davis studied him for a long moment. "I judge by what I see, Young, and what I see here is a well-run ranch, a respected schoolteacher, and two people who have done a lot of good for this territory." He finished his drink and stood. "Whatever brought Miss Blackett to your door, it's clear she's here by choice now. That's all that matters to me." After the sheriff departed, Clara found herself trembling with relief. "He knows everything, yet he's chosen to see the truth of our situation rather than the circumstances that created it. People here judge by actions, like I said." Xavier moved closer, taking her hands in his. "Clara, before we were interrupted, there was something I wanted to say." Her heart raced as she looked up at him. "Yes. From the moment I saw you on that auction block, I knew you were different, special. I told myself I was just doing what any decent man would do, but that wasn't entirely true." His voice deepened with emotion. "I was drawn to your courage, your dignity even in that terrible situation, and every day since I've found more reasons to admire you." "Xavier, please, let me finish." His grip on her hands tightened slightly. "I've been careful not to pressure you to ensure you always had choices. But I can't pretend anymore that my feelings are simply those of an employer or a friend." Clara's breath caught as he continued. "I love you, Clara. I think I have since that first night you sat at my table, determined to maintain your pride despite everything that had happened." He released her hands, stepping back slightly. "You don't need to answer now. You don't need to answer at all if you don't wish to. Nothing changes unless you want it to." In the silence that followed, Clara felt a strange sense of clarity. All the confusion and uncertainty of recent weeks crystallized into a single, undeniable truth: she loved this man who had saved her, respected her, and given her the freedom to find herself again. "I have an answer," she said softly, closing the distance between them. "I love you too." Xavier's expression transformed, hope and joy breaking through his usual reserve. Slowly, Giving her every chance to withdraw, he bent his head to hers. Their lips met in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened as months of restrained emotion found release. When they finally separated, both breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I never dared hope," he murmured. "Nor I," she admitted. "I thought perhaps you saw me always as the woman you rescued, not as someone you could truly want." "I want you in every way a man can honorably want a woman." His voice was rough with emotion. "I want you as my partner, my confidante, my wife if you'll have me." Clara's heart soared at the word. Wife. "That's my Christmas question," he said, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a small velvet box. Inside gleamed a simple gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "Will you marry me, Clara? Not because you need my protection or because you have nowhere else to go, but because you choose me as I choose you." Tears of joy welled in Clara's eyes as she nodded. "Yes, I choose you, Xavier. I would choose you in any circumstance, in any life." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her again, a seal upon their promise. They were married on New Year's Day, with Sheriff Davis officiating and the entire community gathering to celebrate. Martha Henderson had insisted on hosting the ceremony at her farm, the largest property in the area. The women had decorated the barn with evergreens and ribbon, transforming the utilitarian space into a chapel of sorts. Clara wore a dress of deep blue velvet, a gift from the community women who had pooled resources to order the fabric from Helena. Her hair was adorned with a crown of winter berries and pine, and around her neck hung the silver book pendant Xavier had given her for Christmas. Xavier, standing tall and proud in a new black suit, watched with undisguised love as Clara walked toward him on Caleb's arm. The old foreman had tearfully accepted when Clara asked him to give her away, having no father of her own present. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promising love, respect, and partnership through whatever life might bring. When Sheriff Davis pronounced them husband and wife, the gathered community erupted in cheers and applause, genuinely delighted for the couple who had brought education to their children and stability to their region. The celebration continued well into the night, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed the territory. As Clara and Xavier danced, holding each other close in the glow of lantern light, he whispered in her ear, "How does it feel to be Mrs. Young?" "Wonderful," she replied honestly. "Though nothing has really changed between us, hasn't it?" His eyes twinkled with mischief and desire. "I believe there are some significant changes ahead when we return home." Clara blushed, anticipation warming her despite the winter chill. "I look forward to discovering them with you." Later, as they drove back to Double Creek through the starlit night, Xavier wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close against his side. "Are you happy?" he asked, suddenly serious. "Completely," she assured him. "Are you?" he smiled, the expression transforming his face in the moonlight. "More than I ever thought possible. When I built this ranch, I thought I was creating a place for myself alone. Now I see it was always meant for us, a home we'll fill together." Clara leaned into his embrace, marveling at the journey that had brought her here. From the humiliation of the auction block to the joy of this moment, it seemed impossible that less than 6 months had passed. "You once told me I'd have another wedding if I wanted," she reminded him softly. Xavier's arm tightened around her. "And was this one everything you hoped for?" "It was perfect," she said truthfully, "because it was a choice freely made with a man I truly love." They arrived at the ranch to find the house warmly lit, a fire burning in the hearth, and their bedroom prepared with fresh linens and flowers Caleb, and the men's wedding gift to them, arranged during the celebration. As Xavier carried her across the threshold, Clara felt the last shadows of her past fall away. Here was her future, in the arms of a man who had given her freedom and then waited patiently for her to choose him. Here was home. In the years that followed, Double Creek Ranch prospered under their joint care. Clara continued teaching, eventually overseeing the construction of a proper schoolhouse in Benton as the territory grew. Xavier expanded the cattle operation, building a reputation for quality stock throughout Montana. Children came first: a son they named James Caleb Young, after Xavier's father and the foreman who had become family to them both, then twin daughters, Elizabeth and Margaret. The main house was expanded to accommodate their growing family, just as Xavier had once envisioned. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Xavier took Clara's hand, his thumb brushing over the wedding band he had placed there. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Coming west despite everything that happened?" Clara considered the question, her gaze taking in the home they had built together: the flourishing gardens, the sturdy buildings, the land that stretched to the distant mountains. "Never," she said with absolute certainty. "Every step, even the painful ones, led me here, to you. To this life we've created." She squeezed his hand. "I would travel that path again 1,000 times knowing it ends here." Xavier lifted her hand to his lips. "As would I, my love, as would I." The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. On the horizon, storm clouds gathered, promising rain for the thirsty land. But here, on the porch of the home they had built with love and determination, Clara and Xavier Young faced the approaching weather as they faced everything together, stronger for having found each other in the vast wilderness of the Montana Territory, where second chances were possible and love could flourish even in the most unlikely circumstances.